This file, from December 24th of 2003, brings us to a snow-covered cabin in the Sierra Mountains, where one man's sleepless Christmas Eve became an encounter that would forever change how he thinks about the world outside his frosted window panes. You're browsing the Cryptid Archives, narrative short stories based on real cryptid encounters, presented by Cryptids Across the Atlas. An unwelcome Christmas visitor. The Sierra Nevadas wear winter like an old, heavy coat, the kind that's been passed down through generations, absorbing the scents and the stories of countless snowy seasons. That particular December, the mountains seemed to pull that coat tighter around their shoulders, as anticipating the strangeness that would soon unfold within their frozen folds. Our little party arrived at the cabin in high spirits, the truck's tires crunching through fresh powder as we wound our way up the narrow access road. The air was diamond sharp, biting at exposed skin but invigorating after the long drive from the coast. As we tumbled out of the vehicle, stretching stiff limbs and breathing great gusts of steam, the cabin loomed before us like a rustic fortress against the gathering dusk. My old college buddy, Mike, had been inviting us up to his family's vacation spot for years, but something had always fallen through. Work obligations, family commitments, the usual culprits, you know. But this year, the stars had finally aligned. My wife Sarah and I had finally found ourselves with a rare block of free time, and the prospect of a white Christmas in the mountains, it had proven irresistible. Now, standing before the sturdy two-story structure, its honey gold timbers glowing in the late afternoon light, I could see why Mike was so enamored with this place. It looked like something out of a Norman Rockwell painting. All cozy angles and cheerful windows, smoke curling invitingly from the stone chimney. Even the smattering of snow on the roof looked artfully placed, as if the cabin was putting on its holiday best for our arrival. As Mike led us inside, pointing out quirky architectural features and cherished nooks, I felt the city tension begin to drain from my shoulders. The interior was all knotty pine and plush furniture, the kind of overstuffed coziness that invites long conversations and, well, longer naps. An enormous stone hearth dominated one end of the great room, its fireplace already crackling merrily, as if in anticipation of our needs. "Mom and Dad are sorry they couldn't be here to welcome you themselves," Mike had said, dropping our bags by the stairs with a thud. "But they'll be up first thing tomorrow, presents in tow. For now, mi casa su casa." And so began our picture-perfect Christmas getaway. The next few days passed in a blur of homespun comforts, lazy mornings over steaming mugs of coffee, rambunctious board game tournaments, long rambling hikes through the snow-muffled forest. By day, the landscape sparkled like a diamond, the sun reflecting off of the snow-covered hills. At night, though, the stars blazed with a cold, fierce beauty, completely untainted by city light pollution. On Christmas Eve, we pulled out all the stops. Sarah and Mike's girlfriend Jenna commandeered the kitchen, filling the cabin with rich, familiar scents of roasted turkey, baking pies, and gently simmering cider. Mike and I took charge of decorating, draping every available surface with garlands, stringing lights from the rafters until the great room glowed like a jewel box. The dogs, Mike's affable golden retriever Boomer and our little terrier mix Ziggy, supervised the proceedings with thumping tails and hopeful noses. As evening fell, we gathered around the hearth, pleasantly full of good food and better company. The fire popped and hissed, casting playful shadows across the walls as we traded stories and toasted marshmallows to a perfectly charred crisp. Outside, snowflakes drifted lazily past the windows, fat and heavy with promise of a beautiful white Christmas morning. It was the kind of night that embeds itself deep in your memory, like a favorite song, all warm chords and soaring refrains. The kind you know, even in the moment, will become a touchstone, a shining example of what the holidays are supposed to be. Looking around at the faces of my friends, limed in firelight and flushed with laughter, I felt a sudden surge of pure, uncomplicated contentment. If I had known then what the night still held in store, would I have savored that moment more? Clung to it tighter? Fixing every detail in my mind like a snapshot? Or would I have been more watchful, maybe a little more weary of the darkness that pressed against the cabin's cheery windows? As it was, I drifted off to bed, pleasantly exhausted. My belly full of spiced apple cider, and my heart full of quiet joy. Sarah was already curled beneath the quilt in the guest room, her breathing deep and even. I remember passing by the doorway, just watching her for a long moment, marveling at the small miracle of our life together. The room Mike had given us was a charmer, all dark wood and cheery quilts. It sat at the far end of the cabin, with a wide picture window that looked out over the back porch and the forest beyond. As I slipped beneath the covers, the faint scent of cedar and lavender enveloped me like an old friend. I couldn't help but smile at our good fortune together. And sleep came quickly, but it didn't last. The first thing that registered was a faint vibration, like the onset of a distant earthquake. The bed frame seemed to hum with it, the headboard rattling gently against the wall. Somewhere in the fuzzy space between dream and waking, I remember thinking that tremors weren't uncommon in California, that this one would likely pass as quickly as it had come. But then came the footsteps. They were heavy, strategically placed, each one sending a judder through the floorboards that I could feel in my teeth. At first, my sleep-addled brain tried to rationalize them as one of the dogs, or perhaps Mike getting up for a late-night snack. But as the fog of sleep dissipated, the wrongness of the sound became impossible to ignore. The footsteps were too weighty for a dog, too widely spaced for a human, and they were coming from the back porch? The elevated back porch, 6 to 8 feet off the ground with no stairs leading down to the yard? The porch that was, for all intents and purposes, inaccessible from the outside. By the time I finally managed to shake off the last clinging tendrils of sleep and sit up, the footsteps had stopped. The sudden silence rang in my ears, broken only by the faint whistling of the wind through the evergreens outside. For a moment, I wondered if I had imagined the whole thing, if the combination of rich food and unfamiliar surroundings had spawned some peculiarly vivid dream. But then something shifted outside the window, and all thoughts of dreams vanished. The motion was subtle at first, a flicker of a shadow against shadow. It could have been a trick of the eyes, but as I stared, pulse beginning to hammer in my throat, the shadows resolved into a shape, a large, distinctly non-human shape, moving with a fluid grace that sent instinctive alarm bells clanging in my brain. Some detached part of my mind noted clinically that the creature had to be at least 6.5 feet tall, its bulk straining the seams of its shaggy russet coat. It moved on 2 legs, but there was something subtly off about the proportions, the angles of the joints not quite matching anything I knew. One massive hand came up to rest against the window frame, and I saw with a jolt that it bore an opposable thumb. But just as my mind began to process what I was seeing, and as if sensing my gaze, the creature turned its head, and I found myself staring into eyes that were at once utterly alien and achingly familiar. Set deep beneath a heavy brow ridge, they gleamed with a cool, assessing intelligence that stood in stark contrast to the brutish features surrounding them. There was curiosity in that gaze, and something else, something I couldn't quite put a name to. Recognition, perhaps, or maybe understanding. For an endless, crystalline moment, we regarded each other through the thin barrier of the glass. I was acutely aware of my own heartbeat, of the sweat beating on my upper lip despite the chill of the room. Some primal part of me wanted to scream, to bolt, to hide beneath the covers like a child playing peekaboo with the monster under the bed. But I did none of those things. I simply sat there, meeting that fathomless gaze, feeling the weight of a consciousness vast and utterly foreign to my own. In that suspended second, I knew with absolute certainty that I was in the presence of something beyond my understanding, something that defied the neat categories of biology and myth alike. Then, the moment shattered like a soap bubble as the creature turned away. It did so lazily, as if it had all the time in the world, and with a last lingering glance, it slipped back into the darkness beyond the porch, vanishing as seamlessly as it had appeared. I wish I could say I leapt from the bed and raced outside, following the creature's tracks until I uncovered the truth behind its existence, or that I woke the others, insisting we search the woods by flashlight until we found proof one way or another. But in truth, I did neither of those things. Instead, I sat there for a long time, staring out at the night-shrouded forest, my mind awhirl with questions that, quite frankly, had no answers. When I finally did move, it was simply to lie back down beside Sarah, curling around her sleeping form as if her warmth could banish the chill that settled into my bones. I didn't sleep much that night. Every creak of the cabin's old timbers, every whisper of the wind through the eaves, had me silently tensing, wondering if our visitor would return. But the hours crept by without incident, and eventually the pale fingers of dawn began to pluck at the horizon. I was waiting by the coffee pot when Mike and Jenna stumbled into the kitchen that morning, yawning and rubbing the sleep from their eyes. Sarah followed soon after, her face bright with anticipation for the day ahead. I was watching them putter about, cracking eggs and flipping pancakes, their cheerful chatter filling the cozy space like a sunlight spilling through a window. And I said nothing. What could I say? That some unclassified primate had paid a visit to the porch last night, a porch inaccessible to the outside? Yeah, just peeking through the window like some parody of a holiday peeping Tom? That I'd had a close encounter of the cryptid kind right here in the midst of our picture-perfect Christmas? Even in my own mind, it sounded absurd. The kind of thing that would earn me raised eyebrows and worried frowns. So, I sipped my coffee and helped set the table, laughing at all the right moments as we plowed through breakfast and set about opening presents. And if my laughter sometimes stuck in my throat, if my eyes kept straying back to the windows, searching for something that shouldn't be there, well, let's just say that was my secret to keep. Later, when the others were occupied with the post-present lull, I slipped outside. The morning was cold and crystalline, the snow glittering like crushed diamonds beneath a relentless blue sky. my breath plumed before me as I crunched across the yard, following some impulse I didn't quite understand. And the tracks were there, just as I'd known they would be, though part of me believed I wouldn't find anything. Huge and unmistakably humanoid, they led off the edge of the porch, down to the ground, and into the tree line, disappearing into the forest's green-black depths. I stared at those tracks for a long time, my gloved hands clenched at my sides. Part of me longed to follow them, to see where they led, to find some kind of resolution to the mystery that had inserted itself into my life. But another part, the part that remembered the utter otherness in those eyes, whispered that some things are best left alone. That some doors, once opened, can never be fully closed again. In the end, I did not follow the tracks. I didn't take a cast or a photograph or even a measured sketch. I simply stood there, breathing in the pine's sharp air, feeling the weight of the mountain's gaze on my back. When I finally turned away, I had the strangest sensation of leaving something behind. Not just the tracks, but some small, vital piece of myself. A bit of certainty about the world and my place in it. In its absence, I felt oddly hollow, as if some fundamental truth had been scooped out and replaced with a question mark. The rest of the trip passed in a pleasant blur, all the usual holiday rituals and comforts taking on a slightly surreal quality. I laughed and smiled and played my part, but inside, I was turning that night over and over in my mind, examining it from every angle like a jeweler with a faceted gem. It's been years since that Christmas in the mountains, but the memory hasn't faded. It rises unbidden every December, as crisp and chill as the first winter wind. In quiet moments, I sometimes catch myself glancing out windows at dusk, half expecting to see a shaggy, russet shape looking back. I've never told anyone about what I saw that night. Not Sarah, not Mike, not a single soul beyond the silent trees that bore witness. Well, at least until now. In a way, it feels like an intensely personal secret, a moment suspended out of time that belongs only to me and whatever being looked in on our little circle of light and warmth. But I think about it often. About the vastness of the wilderness beyond our human microcosms, about the kinds of intelligence that might exist there to which we were as ants to elephants, about the fine line between monster and miracle, and how sometimes the two are almost indistinguishable from one another. Mostly, though, I think about the nature of disbelief, about how in a single moment, a lifetime of certainties can be upended, leaving nothing but questions in their wake. It's a humbling thing to realize how little we truly know about the world and our place in it. How even our clearest categories, animal, legend, impossibility, can blur and bend in the face of something that defies definition. I don't know what I saw that Christmas Eve. I don't know if it was a physical entity or a spiritual manifestation, a relic species, or an interdimensional traveler. I mean, the sheer possibilities spin the mind in giddy circles like a child's top on a polished floor. But what I do know is this: that in a world so often stripped of magic, of mystery, of the delicious shiver of the unknown, I feel profoundly lucky to have brushed against something beyond my ken. To have had, if only for a moment, a glimpse behind the curtain of consensus reality. out into the wild, liminal spaces that still lurk beneath our electric lights and GPS grids. In those spaces, I believe wonders still walk. Creatures, unconstrained by taxonomy, slip between towering trunks, shadows silent and moss soft. Timeless beings turn ageless eyes to our fragile little constructs and smile secret smiles, amused by our certainty in the face of their existing. And if I'm being honest, sometimes I feel invited to try and catch just a glimpse of what we can't understand. I, for one, have learned to welcome that invitation, to embrace the shiver down my spine, the way it knocks loose all my presumptions and prejudices, leaving me raw and ready to see the world anew. It's not a comfortable thing, this surrender to mystery, but I believe it's necessary. For how can we ever hope to grow if we never allow ourselves to be awed? And so when the nights draw in close and the snow falls soft and deep, I find myself pausing by the windows, cupping my hands against the cold glass, peering out into the darkness with eyes that are no longer sure what they'll find, just in case something is peering back. This short story was based on an encounter originally documented by the BFRO. Links to the original encounter, along with our other cryptid content, can be found below. And what do you think about the creature just outside the window? What was it that our witness saw that Christmas Eve? Was the creature longing to connect? Or did it just so happen to be caught in a moment of trying to understand what was on the inside of that glass? Was what this man saw a dream-induced state? Or could it have been something truly remarkable that had found its way outside of the forests and onto that cabin deck? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and while you're there, don't forget to hit that follow button. If you enjoyed this encounter, please consider leaving an honest review. It helps other cryptid enthusiasts find these stories of the unexplained. And remember to keep your eyes open. You never know what you might see just on the edge of the road.